Welcome to episode 19 of the Yes You Coaching podcast. I'm your host, Anna Manning, and I am going to be talking to you today, second in our Things That Kill Confidence Building mini series, about heckling yourself. So, you might think that heckling is something that just happens at a comedy gig, right? And unless you subject yourself to learning how to become a stand up comedian or attempting to become a stand up comedian, you're going to avoid hecklers. Well, in my experience of coaching people on confidence, not many of us manage to completely avoid hecklers. And here's why. Sometimes, like when you stand on a stage and you're a stand up comedian, hecklers are going to talk to you. Sometimes they're going to be like, "Oi, mate, blah, blah, blah," right? Some drunken idiot. Sometimes they're just going to be getting involved, answering questions. And sometimes they're just going to be shouting things like, "You shit." What kind of hecklers do you have in your own brain? What kind of hecklers live inside your head? I was talking to a client recently about doing a bit of public speaking. And they were saying, in theory, I should feel okay about it because everyone everyone's nice, everyone's kind of supportive. No one ever says, mean stuff. Like, I'm not anticipating that. So it should be fine. And I was like, oh, okay, right. So there's nothing in your environment that's making it scary, but you still feel scared. She said, yeah. I was like, okay, what is going on inside your own brain in those moments? And she was like, oh, well, yeah, that's completely different. That's like, you sound rubbish, you're boring, they're losing interest, your accent sounds bad. Like there was all of these things. And I was like, so basically, you're getting heckled from inside your own head. She was like, yeah. So like, well, how would you feel if you were doing that public speaking? The people in the room were literally heckling that shit at you. They were like, you're boring. Look at their faces. Look at our faces. We're all bored. Your accent sounds shit. She was like, I would be mortified and probably quite scared. I was like, how are you feeling right now in that meeting? She was like, mortified and quite scared. I was like, then we have our problem. Houston, we at least know what the problem is. You're getting heckled from your own brain. And one of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this today, one of the reasons I'm doing this little mini series about things that kill confidence building, is that I'm currently like knee deep in a Confident at Work program. And the women that are going through that program are making amazing strides. They're doing good stuff. They're like growing their confidence left, right, and center. But I am seeing firsthand and being reminded of all the things that get in the way of confidence building, all the stuff that kills confidence building. And one of them is having hecklers in your own head. Now, there's going to be moments where you have hecklers outside of your own head, and that's tricky to deal with. But there's going to be times where you have hecklers inside your own head, and you need to know that because it's going to have an impact on what's happening to you. One of the reasons that this has such an impact for people is because you're essentially trying to do two things at once. You're trying to do whatever you're doing, like a bit of public speaking or, I don't know, speaking in a meeting, presenting at a board, whatever. So you're trying to do that, the thing you're actually trying to do. But at the same time, you're trying to deal with the hecklers that are in your head. And they can be very off putting. Like, think about it in real life. If you were standing up and like trying to deliver your comedy gig and you were getting heckled and you were just trying to carry on and trying to push through it, it would be distracting. It would be really difficult to just deliver your material while someone's shouting your shit off from the side. And then someone else was like, you're boring. Imagine how hard it would be. I don't know how many of you have actually ever attempted stand-up comedy. I never have. But I'm guessing one of the reasons that most people wouldn't is because you are literally like laying yourself open in a situation where you need to connect with an audience, but the audience is full of people that could do anything and could say anything, and they do, right? We've all been to comedy gigs. But what I want us to think about in this episode is whether you're being heckled from inside your own brain in those moments, and if you are, what you can do about it. Because most people who I coach either don't really quite notice that it's happening, or they do notice and they, one, don't know there's anything they can do about it, and two, don't know what to do about it. And if you're in the process of trying to build your confidence, trying to get better at something, this is something that's getting in the way for you. You need to be able to deal with it. You need to be able to notice it, and you need to know how you want to handle it. So I reached out to my friend Charlotte when I was thinking about doing this episode because she has been learning to do stand-up comedy, and I went to one of her stand-up comedy gigs and it was good, actually. I found it funny. I got a drink for laughing, which was weird because I thought they should probably give the drinks to the people that weren't laughing. But anyway, and I was enjoying it. I was having a good time. And I was thinking, like, what in comedy, they know that there's going to be hecklers, right? It's part of the experience. It's like, it's part of comedy and it's part of having an audience. So I was like, well, they probably must, when people are learning, they go through this course, like they must kind of teach them about hecklers and, you know, how you deal with it and all that kind of thing. And everyone, you know, comedians that you see, they deal with it slightly differently. But I was like, they must get taught about this stuff. So I went to my friend Charlotte and I was like, okay, Charlotte, you've just gone through comedy school. Like, what is the thing with hecklers? Like, how do you get taught to deal with that? Do you like get taught to think about it? What is it? And she said, I think in comedy you have to learn to deal with the hecklers. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. So when you are doing this for, you know, you're giving stand-up comedy a go and you're being taught about it, you're taught you have to learn to deal with the hecklers. And she like shared a little bit for me, which was really interesting. And I'm going to read it to you. And it says, hecklers are an essential part of comedy and what makes it different from other art forms. A skilled comedian knows how to respond appropriately to suggestions and comments from members of the audience and identify when audience members have crossed the line and stand up to them when needed. And I was like, that is exactly what you need to do with the hecklers in your own head. Apparently, hecklers are an essential part of being a human and trying to do things at work. I don't think they're just an essential part of comedy. I think they're an essential part of life. Having hecklers in your own head. Anybody not got hecklers in their own head? Because I sure as hell have. So let's say they're an essential part of life, so we're going to have to learn to deal with them. So here's what we have with the comedian. A skilled comedian knows how to respond appropriately to suggestions and comments from members of the audience. So somebody who's skilled at life should know how to respond appropriately to suggestions and comments from members of the audience that are in their own head. And it says, identify where audience members have crossed a line. Can you identify where the voices in your own head have crossed a line? And then it says, and stand up to them when needed. The client that I was talking about earlier, when the hecklers in her head are saying stuff like, you're boring. Oh my God, look at their faces. They're bored. And, oh, your accent sounds bad. She didn't know how to deal with them. She didn't know that maybe it was a good idea to stand up to them because, I mean, this is for her to decide, but to me, that's crossing a fucking line. If you're going to sit in my audience and say to me, you're boring, your accent sounds shit, do you think a comedian's just going to be like, ignore them and carry on? Or do you think they're going to know how to manage them? Or do you think they're going to address them directly and be like, okay, Bill, right? There's different ways of dealing with different kinds of hecklers. So let's think about the two different kinds. Friend Charlotte says, a comedian knows how to respond appropriately to suggestions and comments from members of the audience. So think about it. Sometimes the members of the audience that live in your head, the hecklers that live in your head, they have got comments and suggestions. So you might hear things like, oh God, remember to do more prep for that. It's a comment or a suggestion. How do you deal with that? You might be like, okay, noted, thank you. Moving on. Or you might hear the voice in your head be like, make sure you slow down at that part. That part really needs to sink in. Great. Noted. I will do that. Comments and suggestions probably don't raise a lot of alarm in you. They might be a bit annoying, especially if they're persistent or kind of ill-timed, right? Might be a bit annoying. But on the whole, they're not going to make you feel that bad. They're probably not going to raise the internal alarm in you. And when I say that, I mean some heckling, if it's just like a comment or a suggestion from your brain, you're like, okay, it's not going to make you stressed. It's not going to like activate your fear response. It's not going to make you start sweating and stammering and having a dry mouth and all the rest of it. So that's one level of quote unquote audience participation. That's one level of heckling that you might hear in your own brain. But what about the other half? What about the half when the audience members have crossed a line and when you need to stand up to them? Do the hecklers in your brain cross a line? Mine definitely used to. Definitely used to. I think now sometimes they like approach the line, but they're a little bit cautious with me. Maybe I'm like maybe I'm a bit scarier with them than I used to be. But sometimes we think, oh, you know, I need to be like all nicey with everyone. And yeah, sometimes maybe if someone's just making a comment or a suggestion, yeah, nicey is fine. And you can do that with the voices in your own brain, the hecklers in your own brain. But what about when those hecklers are crossing a line and they're saying stuff like, you're boring, your accent sounds like shit. That's a line crossed in my book. How many of the things that your brain heckles at you do you think, do you know what? That is crossing a line. If someone else was saying that to me, I'd be like, what the hell? I want you to know when the hecklers in your own head are crossing a line. Because it's then that you're going to need to use your stand-up comedy training. Pray to God this isn't the only stand-up comedy training you ever get. But it's then that you're going to need to know when to stand up to them. And it's when they're attempting to cross a line or they're crossing a line that you need to actually stand up to them. Now, let me give you an example of something that used to happen to me. I would go to a workshop or facilitation or training, something that I was going to do. And the voice in my head would be like, oh God, you haven't prepared enough. Now, I take that as a comment or a suggestion. And I'm like, the way I deal with that is I'm like, okay, hello, knew you were going to pop up, have done enough prep, chill out, don't worry about it, I've got it. That was a comment or a suggestion from the audience, let's say. It didn't cross a line. It didn't cross an emotional line for me. It was a bit stressful, but, not really. It's fine. Where it crossed the line is I'm going to a workshop or I'm going to do a facilitation, and I hear the heckler in my brain saying something like, you have got nothing to say to these people. Who the hell are you to even be speaking about this stuff? That crosses a line. That heckler needs standing up to. That's not banter. That's abuse. And I don't have a place for it in my head. I do not wish to tolerate it. I would not want you to have to tolerate it either. And if we think of this in comedy terms, if somebody was heckling that at me, then bring it on. Like, game on. I'm going to have to stand up to that as the comedian. And I want you to consider, what are the moments when the voice in your brain like really crosses a line? Like if somebody else was listening to what was happening in your brain, they'd say, Jesus Christ, like, go easy on yourself. What on earth? And you might be able to identify moments where your brain's saying, you're shit, your accent sounds terrible. Why are you even bothering? Nobody wants you here. You don't belong in this room. You're not funny. You're stupid. You're going to sound stupid. I hear this stuff day in, day out from people who are building their confidence. This is not benign. This is not stuff that you should just have to accept without being able to stand up for yourself. If you're getting heckled like this from inside your own head, if you're like, yeah, actually, some of the stuff that my brain heckles me with is really crossing a line, I want you to think about how you want to stand up to them. Because you don't just have to be at the effect of the heckler in your own head. You don't just have to believe whatever they say, take whatever they say, and just carry on and never speak back. You're the one with the microphone. You can turn around to them, look them square in the face and be like, now then. Now, you might not want to do that in the moment where you're trying to address a board and you can hear the heckler in your brain. That might not be the moment for it. It might, but it might not. You might have to do it afterwards. You might take that voice aside and be like, what you did in there was bad. It wasn't funny and it wasn't helpful. And quite frankly, if you carry on like that, you're never coming to one of my gigs again. I will not listen to you. I do not believe you. You're talking shit. How would you defend yourself? Would you ban them from your gig? Would you just literally talk over them in the microphone, stop them from speaking? Your choice. If you've got that kind of heckler that lives in your head, believe me, it will be having an impact on your confidence. I often coach people who they might have struggled with a particular thing for a long time. And they might have tried some things, there might have been some trainings, whatever. Like, for instance, having to address a big meeting, a big team meeting. They might find that difficult. And they'll say, well, I thought if I just went out there over and over again that, one day I would get used to it. And so that would be okay. And I could kind of fake it till I make it and great. And there's a problem with this approach. Sometimes that approach works. But sometimes, if you're going out there over and over again and you're trying to build your confidence in an environment that feels really difficult and unsafe because of those types of hecklers, you could go out there a million times and it's probably not going to get better. It might actually get worse. Because if you're anticipating the hecklers next time you go out there, you're probably already going to be scared before you even get out there. So if you've been going at something for a while and thinking, oh, it'll be better if I just keep doing it, it might be better if you just keep doing it. But if you're working with this kind of internal heckling, that might be a reason why it's not getting any better. Why you still keep talking to that team meeting and it still feels terrible. That might be why. All right. That's what I've got for you about hecklers. I want you to know about your own hecklers. And I want you to think about how you want to deal with them. If you're just dealing with them just by ignoring them and potentially believing everything they say, which is sometimes what we do, that might not be the best way. There might be other ways. For the kind of more benign hecklers with the suggestions and comments, yeah, you might be able to deal with those by addressing them. Some of them you can just ignore. But for the hecklers that are crossing a line, you need to stand up to them in comedy and in life. So that's what I've got for you today. I hope that it encourages you to think about the hecklers in your own head. And especially to consider how, if you have hecklers that are giving you grief, how that might be impacting your confidence, or it might be impacting how you show up, what you're able to do, how you feel while you're doing it. If you want my help to feel more confident at work, talk to me about one-on-one coaching. This episode is coming out at the beginning of November 2022, and I am taking on some new clients before Christmas 2022. So if you want to feel more confident by Christmas, come and work with me, come and coach with me. One of the things that we might find when we start digging around in your brain is that you have some pretty mean hecklers. And we will really break down and look at how do you deal with those so you can feel more confident and more calm. You have to learn how to deal with them when you're becoming a stand-up comic. I also think you have to learn to deal with them when you are building your confidence. Or when you are just existing as a human and trying to do stuff at work. But it's vital. So, happy non-heckling yourself day. Enjoy your week. Enjoy your weekend. And if you're thinking about coaching with me, I am going to leave my details in the show notes. You can go and click in there and you can book a time to come and talk to me. I suppose I should have thought of a joke to end this podcast with, given that it was about comedy, but do you know what? What the hell? I don't have one to hand. I'll leave the jokes to my friend Charlotte, with thanks to her for her comments and suggestions on comedy and stand-up comedy. All right. See you in the next episode. Bye.